Coming up next on Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, we have Allyn Malventano with us to talk a lot of storage technology. We're going to mention Z68 motherboard availability and even new budget graphics cards from AMD. All that and more coming up.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust. This is Twitch.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 116, recorded April 21st, 2011. Storage. Lots of storage. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes and movies streamed to your PC, Mac, or TV instantly. Plus, get DVDs by mail in about one business day. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit. Hi, everybody. Welcome to This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm your host, Ryan Shrout. Now, Patrick Norton is out gallivanting around, camping with the family, doing fun stuff like that. So I roped in a different person to co-host with me today. Everybody say hello to Allyn Malventano. Hi, Allyn. How are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Many of you probably know Allyn from his day job working for PC Perspective, maybe on the PC Perspective podcast. And it turns out, in terms of news and stuff like that going on, we've actually got a lot in the storage world, so it kind of fits in. It's good to have you here. Thanks for filling in Patrick's shoes for us.
Absolutely.
All right. A couple of quick things to get to. One, a graphics card release occurred. I feel like we have to talk about it, otherwise the world will end if we don't talk about a new GPU every week. That is the Radeon. These are budget cards, HD 6670 and HD 6570. They're relatively small cards. I mean, you can see here, this doesn't look like any of the type of behemoths that you might have seen before. But this is more likely the card that you'll find in a computer that you buy at Best Buy or Micro Center or Fry's that has a built-in graphics, discrete graphics. You're talking about something about this performance level, this type of market segment. Now, both of these new cards are priced under $100, which means one of them is $99 and one of them is $79. And they're pretty good cards for that price range. You know, the performance is marginally better than the 5600 and 5500 series cards, which they are replacing. You still have support for 3 graphics outputs. These reference cards actually have a VGA, a full-size DisplayPort, and a DVI connection, dual-link DVI. Although the cards that you get in retail are going to vary from that. And actually, the 6670 actually supports 4 displays. So if you happen to find one with a dual slot configuration, there's a good shot that you'll see maybe 2 DVI and 2 DisplayPort on there, or 2 DVI and an HDMI and a DisplayPort, something like that. So keep an eye out for those. If you want to find like the lowest cost solution to getting 3, maybe even 4 displays on your PC out of a single card, these could be the option for that. The performance-wise, you know, the only quick comment I guess I'll make here about this is that they're not gonna storm the barns in terms of gaming performance. Don't expect them to. For $99 and $79. Their competition in the AMD and NVIDIA realm is kind of screwing things up a little bit for these cards, because what we're seeing now are cards like the GeForce GTX 450. This is a Galaxy edition, it's slightly overclocked, but you can pick this up for under $100 on sale sometimes. And the same thing goes for the Radeon HD 5770. And those cards are previous generation technology, but in terms of just raw gaming performance, they are going to be better than the 6670, for example. Now, there's different caveats along to go with that. Of course, the GTX 450 only supports 2 displays, depending on what you want to do with it. I don't think Eyefinity gaming is really an option for cards of this performance level. But if you're building a home theater PC, if you are stuck on integrated graphics, if someone in your family is stuck on integrated graphics, and you know they just picked up a copy of Portal 2, just as an example, right? I was able to play Portal 2 at 19 by 12 on the 6670 card, you know, with not everything turned up all the way. And again, we have a pretty fast processor in our GPU test rig, but this was able to handle that game. Portal 2, definitely not stressful on your hardware. Can Our video editor guy just has an older MacBook that's using a 9400M integrated graphics, and he was able to run that game as well, but had to lower a lot of the image quality settings and stuff like that. So, these cards are going to be upgrades for integrated graphics solutions. They're not going to replace anybody that's got a discrete solution already, more than likely. It would be good for a home theater PC, though, like I'm saying. So if you got multiple outputs, one to a monitor, one to a TV, these cards can completely handle that. So if you are in the market for that sub $100 graphics card, probably not for your primary gaming machine, you can go check those out. The full review is on the PC Perspective website, of course, where we've got all the benchmarks and analysis and that kind of stuff. All the clock speeds and feeds if you want that type of information. For those people who are curious, the GPUs behind these new cards are the Bart's architecture, the 6800 series of cards. This is I think, what did I say? This has 480 stream processors as compared to the 1800, 1600 of the other cards as well. So that's our graphics card news for the day. I guess, Allyn, while we've got you here, let's jump into storage-based stuff. There's quite a bit of it out here. The first was this? Would you consider this a merger of two companies, Seagate and Samsung, or just a merger of their kind of like storage facilities or storage segments of their companies? What exactly happened here, and does it really kind of affect the consumer?
It's hard to tell exactly where this is going to go. I just consider it a merger, because really, if they're working together, it's just a matter of time before they come out with some kind of joint project or product. Who knows at this point? But for now, we do have the announcement that says, look, these two companies are in fact working together from now on, and trading IP back and forth. So what we're looking at is Seagate and Samsung. Both of them are now working together, so that's one side of the storage arena, if you will, now, as opposed to it being sort of was sort of like in roughly thirds with like a little sliver of a fourth snuck in there.
Right.
So now you've got Seagate and Samsung, and let's see what percentages that makes them out to be. Seagate and Samsung together ends up being 40% of the market. So that's a little bit of a bigger number there, as opposed to much smaller fractions that were competing against Western Digital, which is 48%. So that's good. That's actually sort of good for competition. Although I will say that there isn't exactly like a price war or people having to undercut people, right, for hard drive storage, right? Because these days you see 2 and 3 terabyte drives that are cents per gigabyte. That they're trying to compete performance wise against solid state, which is really coming on strong, especially in the last few months. So yeah, it's just really, you see all these companies just sort of joining forces, I think, really just to help try to compete against the inevitable, which is eventually, years from now, we're going to see probably almost everything solid state. That's just my hunch, because the process shrinks and whatnot. So 48% Western Digital, 40% now for this little dynamic duo that got created.
They pretty much had to do it, it seems like, in order to compete. Western Digital just seems so dominant in the market at this point in terms of market share.
Right.
It was almost like something that needed to happen. And I don't think it's a negative for the consumer, do you?
No, I don't think so at all. But again, since there's really not much price war going on, I don't see it as much, a good or a bad, really, for the consumer. Okay. It just seems like these companies just need to do this to stay afloat, really, given, what's going on in the market and shifts that tend to be happening. So yeah, there we have it. All we can do really there is just watch and see what comes out of it. The one thing to consider that's actually pretty good out of this is Samsung is really strong in the SSD market. So you have a potential for them to somehow merge with Seagate, maybe make some kind of hybrid, some kind of caching drive, something good might come out of that with some Samsung parts snuck into some Seagate hardware possibly. Right. But we won't know until we see something materialize.
Let's talk about something else that we've seen kind of creeping around in the news of different websites and that kind of stuff. I don't think we've actually posted anything at the PC Perspective site, but it's interesting to look at nonetheless. It kind of falls more on the business side of things than necessarily the hardware side of things, but I think it put a lot of questions and doubts into people's minds. It's about a company that both you and I are very familiar with. We've used a lot of their products. We've tested and talked about a lot of their products, and that's OCZ.
Right.
If again, a little bit of inside baseball, in the last couple of days, their stock has gone down on something of the order of 30% in the matter of, an hour or so. And there was a lot of, in the financial world, that's a big deal. For consumers, they're not really worried about what the company's value is or anything like that. They're really not interested in what the stock markets are and that kind of thing. But they are worried about if the company that they buy their products from is potentially going out of business, if the product that they have has a warranty, that they like those products and they just don't want them to leave the market. One of the things we say is OCZ definitely pushes the SSD market forward and pushes these other guys along to invest and to iterate at a faster pace.
Right.
So Allyn sent me notice of this, what was going on, and there were like two there was a report that was put out, I guess, by it was picked up. See, here's the thing: just the fact that there was a report that came out is one thing, but the fact that it was picked up by this website, Seeking Alpha, which, from what I understand, is a pretty good website for investors. Read it, and that's where they get some of their gouge. It's almost like the Slashdot of, investing, right? So they picked up a paper, 23-page, really just ripping and scathing piece from Copperfield Research, and they pretty much did like everything they could to just rip OCZ a new one. I mean, it's really. I read through the thing, and it was just wow. There's some really nasty stuff in there. And here's the thing, though. I, as a storage reviewer who has looked at like every single product that is named as like what they're competing against, like they mentioned Fusion IO, they mentioned other solid state vendors and other solid state technology companies and innovators and whatnot. And I have the luxury of knowing really how all these products work when pushed to the limits. And I can say that at least some of that report is just way out there. I mean, they're talking about stuff where as if OCZ is just trying to be as if they were Fusion IO and trying to pretend to be that. That sort of thing. It's almost like they're being like as if like poser kind of stuff. Right. Just really, really weird. It was even hard to read through the wording. It was so scathing. It's like so some of it seemed pretty childish.
It really was. It really was.
We didn't really understand the industry, and this is more again. It's kind of a financial issue here, but it was the guy who posted this report also said that he had to disclose that he had short sells on OCZ stock, which, without going into a lot of detail, means that he makes money as the OCZ stock goes down. And I don't understand how you can see that and not immediately go, okay, maybe there's something.
It wouldn't even have been as bad if he would have disclosed, hey, I happen to own OCZ stock, right? But if he comes out, he says he's shorting him, right? Then okay, it's like, here's my paper that will make me money by doing this, because I'm going to sell this and then I'm going to go buy it when it's cheaper. And that's exactly what the stock did too, right? Because that report came out and they were up like 8%, like early. I think this is all today, as a matter of fact. So they were up 8 early in the morning, and then they dipped 37%. And they rebounded, they got like 50% of that back almost immediately. But that's almost like market manipulation with a report, right? Because as soon as the guy knows the thing gets picked up, between that and actually reading the report, and I'm not really trying to just flat out defend anybody here, OCZ or anybody, right? Right. Because it is possible that there could be 1 or 2 points out of that thing that are legitimate, but that we won't know, and there's someone's probably going to look at it based on this report, I would imagine. Well,
they said he sent it to the SEC to investigate on OCZ, and I wouldn't be surprised if they do some of that on him as well, based on the fact that he had shorts and stuff like that. So. Yeah, because that kind of a scathing thing. I mean, if I was a nasty market manipulator type and wanted to pull something like that off, that's how I would write that thing. Just the way, but just sort of touching on why I think a lot of it is just really FUD that was just being generated was the way that they're wording it. They're not realizing it's as if they had really not much of a grasp on the solid state market, just in general, right? And B, the big revenues that OCZ is pulling in, they're pulling in because most of their products are
tailored more towards consumer. They're going for like the volume, right? The big chunk of the market. The guys that are just building their PCs and not necessarily only enthusiasts, right? Because they have other lines of SSDs now that are tailored towards OEMs that are trying to, that have actually been selling. And the bulk of OCZ sales, believe it or not, even though they tailor and they have these lines that are all pushed towards consumer, the bulk of their actual like net income is coming from enterprise sales, from like their Sandforce equipped SSDs, that sort of thing. So their margins are much better there, but at the same time, they have the whole consumer push, right? And anybody that's looked at their product lines, they have like any possible choice under the sun that you want to go for. They have drives that they have drives with lower cost flash memory. They're like, hey, this might not be as reliable. It's a cheaper flash. It's it might be a little bit less on performance, but it's there, right? So they have all these options. It's almost like the Malcolm Gladwell thing on his TED Talk on spaghetti sauce, right? If you have a bunch of different kinds of spaghetti sauce, you sell a whole bunch more, as opposed to just one choice.
Oh, right.
Same exact thing, just with solid state, right? And they're actually pulling it off, as evidenced by the fact that they're on the stock market. Their stock has been doing well for a considerable amount of time now. Yeah, and the one thing that really caught me and sort of rubbed me wrong there was that comparison with Fusion IO, because OCZ has a product that competes pretty well with an IO drive. And we're talking like the Revo, like Revo X2, those drives. And the important thing that I always hammer on that is the OCZ solution is bootable. And Fusion IO has been promising just to be able to boot from their product for like on the order of 4 years now, and have yet to pull it off, right? So there's like a critical feature for not necessarily enterprise, because enterprise is just they're gonna use it for a database and they're booting off of something else. But I'm sure there's a lot of enterprise that would like to be able to boot off of a much faster product that costs several $1,000s. Whereas you can just spend less than $1,000 on an OCZ, solution that's in the ballpark on performance, or at least pretty close, and is bootable, right? So, yeah, just simple apples to apples comparison there, where the article just got it completely 180 out, just on those points.
I think the takeaway here, though, is if you're a consumer and you're using OCZ products, I wouldn't be worried about it. We got an official statement from OCZ that's basically like, we don't comment on rumors and speculation. Here's a link to a couple of reports that were put out by other industry analysts that say different things. So I wouldn't worry about any of this yet. I think I don't think we're going to be a problem. Another thing that doesn't seem to be a problem is the health of the PC industry as a whole. There's a good little story over here at Tech Report talking about Intel CEO Paul Otellini talking with Forbes magazine, doing a big long interview there. That basically they're saying that the PC industry is booming thanks in part to corporations phasing out Windows XP and buying Windows 7 machines, and a strong uptick in emerging markets like China, Brazil, and India. He did mention that this was well above what industry analysts thought the market was going to do. I mean, they talked about they almost made $3 billion in profits that quarter. Apple made over $6 billion in profit last quarter, I think. And both of those beat industry projections by quite a bit. And it seems that Intel has made a habit of this. They said in 2009, Intel predicted PC unit growth in the high teens for 2010. Analysts reported 5 to 6% is what they were going to expect in that market, and then the real number actually ended up turning up to be 17%. So sometimes, these industry experts, these analysts, the guys we were kind of talking about in the last story, don't really have all the facts. Whereas when you're in the manufacturing standpoint, you're actually doing the day-to-day selling and that type of stuff, you can see a lot more of that information. So that's good news for anybody that thinks that Intel or AMD or any of these companies like NVIDIA are included in that too, are somehow slowing down their progression of technology. They're somehow slowing down development. That's definitely not the case. There's huge markets and they're still growing with which they can sell to and market to. So that's definitely good news as well.
And to follow on that, just a quick note, that pretty much means that with that much of a gross income for Intel, they're almost not even touched by the whole recall that they had to do, the whole Sandy Bridge chipset issue, right? So with so much growth, it's like, oh, okay, we spent a bill on that thing, but that's okay, no big deal.
Yeah, it'd be nice if you could do that, right? If we had that capability.
Wouldn't yeah. Just it's pocket change.
You know, one of the things that might be helping Intel out in this is that there's a report from Digitimes that says Intel is ready to release the Z68 chipset in the first half of next month, the first half of May. It says Gigabyte is likely to be the first major motherboard maker to launch Z68-based products as soon as the embargo expires. I would expect MSI and ASUS to be on that day as well. I don't know why the story necessarily thinks Gigabyte is somehow going to be on top there. They have reportedly been informed that Intel will focus more on its Z and H series chipsets, with the P67 series motherboards beginning to be phased out, as even the future next generation chipsets will not have P series branded products. So I know we get a lot of questions here at Twitch about when's a good time to upgrade my system. What about P67? What do I want to send in my P67, get it replaced? If these reports are right, and within the first half of May, we're talking about less than 30 days then before you'll start to see Z68 motherboards. And Z68 motherboards are going to have all kinds of additional features, the ability to utilize your integrated graphics and discrete graphics at the same time, use that Lucid Virtue software.
That is huge.
We've been talking about. They have the SSD caching technology, which we'll hopefully have a whole lot more on later, around the first half of May, perhaps, if the story is to be believed. And so that's pretty cool. And that's kind of, I know what a lot of people are thinking, that people who bought in Sandy Bridge earlier are like, man, I bought this P67 motherboard and now this new option is going to come out that's going to have all these other features. I feel kind of like I got duped. And it's hard not to feel that way, considering the product launched January 8th and it is now April. It's been four plus months now. That's not totally unreasonable, and it will be past 5 months by the time this launch happens, according to this Digitime story. So not too bad, I guess, in that regard. But
what actually, on the opposition to that point, though,
yeah,
if you're feeling duped on that, there were an awful lot of rumors, like when everything first came out, that okay, there's going to be P series and there's going to be H series, but you can only use integrated video on H series, and so everybody just sort of put that, connected the dots there, and there were even rumors to the effect of Z series or potentially Z series boards coming out soon, right? And those were pretty early, like as the products were shipping. So
right,
you sort of, if you were able to hold out for another few more months, then you were good. And honestly, if you didn't, it's just a motherboard, right? If you already bought the K series CPU that's got the GPU on there, you're still good. You're golden. Just swap the motherboard, throw the other one on eBay, call it a day.
Boom, done. Let's see. We've got one more little bit of news here. This is more of a visual representation. We always talk about PC gaming here and how it might be falling behind because of console dominance, like that type of thing. If you look, we just talked about Portal 2 being able to play it on a GeForce GT 430 with most of those types of settings maxed out. Keep in mind, there are other games out there that are going to stress your hardware if you feel the need that you want to buy a $500 graphics card. There is a video that will be linked here in the show notes and that hopefully we'll be showing here in the video portion pretty soon, of Battlefield 3, which is, I forget when that's actually due out, sometime this year. DX11 build. Go check out this video. If you look on YouTube, let's see if I can find the actual title of it. So anybody who's listening, just look for Battlefield 3 full-length fault line gameplay trailer. And it's pretty impressive visually. There's a lot of cool gameplay elements that you get to see in this type of stuff. Just always want to remind PC gamers, because that's such a heavy source of our listenership and readership, is that there are still titles that are coming out that are going to push your hardware, that are going to push your graphics card, that are really going to show improvement over console games. And I think we will start to see that more and more probably over the rest of this year, as game developers are finally realizing what they're leaving behind by sticking with the consoles, and as we get closer and closer to that inevitable bump in console specs as well. Once those developers get word of that, they'll start increasing what their games are doing today. So yeah, real quick before we get in, we'll take a break to thank today's sponsor, and then we'll get into some of your Twitter and email questions, a handful of which are obviously storage related based on our guest co-host. But I will also implore people to go check out the new PCPer.com site. It's kind of a plug here for our own benefit. Completely redone if you haven't been there, pcper.com. Some of the news and reviews that we talk about on This Week in Computer Hardware are mentioned and discussed further there as well. But before we move on, we'll take a quick second to thank today's episode sponsor. That would be Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes instantly on your TV, your Mac, your PC, through your Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, Wii, anything like that. They deliver them directly to your home, saves you time, money, and hassle. No driving to the store. You don't have to go to Redbox even, which is, Redbox got rid of the person at the movie rental place, and now you can get rid of the Redbox unit itself by sitting at home and using these different streaming technologies. There are thousands of TV episodes and movies, like I mentioned, on the PC, Mac, and all kinds of Netflix-ready devices. Plus, you can still get those DVDs by mail in about one business day, which, depending on the selection, you might still do both of. You get some streaming, you get some DVDs. I know my wife likes to go back and forth and use different ones. If some movies aren't available on that, she'll get them on DVD, but we always prefer the streaming. It's just because it's instant. You don't have to wait for anything. It's always good. Now, one of the things, we're supposed to make a pick here and make a suggestion of what you could use Netflix streaming for. I think we've gone through Toy Story 3 was last week's or the week before that. This week I found one right on the front page as soon as I went to Netflix, and I think Allyn will probably enjoy this one as well. And this is the Twilight Zone original series. Were you ever a fan of those?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
How would you describe the show? Because it was a mix of humor and supernatural and space aliens. It was each show was its own individual story.
Here's what I found cool about the Twilight Zone series, the original one, just over the years, right? Because when I was watching it growing up, it was really cool for all those aspects you just mentioned, and then as I got a little older, I realized, wait, there's some really cool actors. It's almost like you're taking a trip down memory lane because you see really big actors that they were bringing in there that at the time, they were just sort of everybody was used to them. But now it's there's one episode that had William Shatner in it, right? That people may not know,
is a famous episode. Yeah, because of that.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're one of our
stories were really good, right? The stories were always really good. The episodes were really mind-bending kind of episodes, and that series was actually. If you think about it, it's the origin of a lot of the modern day series are just sort of rehashes of that. Like Fringe is sort of like Twilight Zone with just a longer arching plot, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. So they have us on instant streaming, which is pretty awesome. So if you're one of our younger viewers or listeners and you've never seen Twilight Zone, don't be put off because it's going to be, it's old actors. A lot of it's in black and white. I don't know if these were colorized or anything like that. They might or might not have been, but they're really, really worth watching. So you can watch this TV series or choose from thousands of TV episodes or other movies when you register for the free trial membership at netflix.com/twit, TWIT. So if you sign up for your free trial, netflix.com/twit, give that one a shot or any other of their available streaming videos or DVDs to your house in about a day. We thank Netflix for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware. Now let's get on to some reader input questions, that type of thing. If you want to get in contact with us, the best way is to send us an email, twich@twit.tv. That's TWICH @twit.tv. Or you can follow at Ryan Shrout, at Patrick Norton, and of course at Malventano. It's just Malventano?
That's it.
On Twitter?
At Malventano.
There you go. Easy to do. Let's see. The first one here comes from Jeju Kevin, who asks, will SATA 6G 7200 RPM hard drives be just as fast through a PCI add-on card than through an on-board controller?
That has a complicated answer. It all depends on what PCI add-on card you're using.
Right.
And here's what's weird about that, okay? Because if you're talking about a spinning disk, typically it's not going to go any faster on 6 gigabit versus 3 gigabit because the disk is you just can't get that bandwidth off of it. The only time you do actually see any kind of a gain is when you're just reading from things that happen to be in the cache, which when you consider hard drives in terabyte size these days versus a 16 or 32 megabyte cache, if you are getting that faster speed, you're not getting it for long, right? Because whatever it was, it's over the bus in a fraction of a second, and then the cache is empty. So probably 99% of the case is 3 gigabit or 6 gigabit spinning disk. Performance is identical. However, there's some chips that we have seen perform more poorly than your native on motherboard type of solution. And in my experience, it's been Marvell, unfortunately. So, and granted, my testing has only been with onboard, like it was actually built into the motherboard, but it really is no different logically. If you have an add-on board that happens to have a Marvell chip on it, it's still going to do the same thing. It works the same. Best place to look if you actually want to see what that difference was. Back when the Caviar Black 1 terabyte model came out, we did a review on that, and that was the Western Digital's first 6 gigabit per second serial ATA drive.
Right. Yep.
And I tested it on both. I did it on ICH10 and I did it on a Marvell with whatever the most current drivers were at the time. And I've even checked it a little more recently, and they're not really that much better. So whatever it was, they haven't worked around it. But you'll see. I forget if it was read or write performance. It was one or the other, I think. Like sequential took like a 5 or 10% drop, just unexplained, right? It didn't make any sense. And the IOs per second performance was actually a little worse on Marvell as well, just because, well, you're taking another hop, you're going across PCI bus, whereas ICH10, that controller is much more integrated with the chipset, and it has a much faster pipe to talk to the CPU and the rest of the system. So your latency is just much lower on the onboard solution. And yeah, in my experience, if you have an Intel board, any Intel-based board, don't bother, regardless of if the thing came with, J-Micron, Marvell, all these other add-on controllers. You see Asus and everybody else, they love tacking those things on because users look for more features when they're,
more SATA ports, higher numbers.
Exactly. It's a higher number thing, but it's really even worse than the megapixel race for cameras when it comes to how many of those ports are.
There's still something too. If you fill up 6 SATA ports on your board, it's always nice to have more if you want to add your optical drives, or if you do have another hard drive that you want to use or something like that, some eSATA adapter perhaps. I mean, there's still some use there. But I think for the majority of users, 6 SATA ports is going to be plenty.
Yeah. And it's actually very handy on that respect for like a J-Micron or a Marvell, if it happens to be the controller that's giving you your eSATA port out of the back of the board, right? Because the Intel ICH solutions are not intended to supply that eSATA port, so the motherboard manufacturers tap it off from the other chip.
Nice. All right, let's take another question here from Dino Kadich, who wants to know another storage question. He just got an Intel 320 SSD. Is there anything I should do to optimize performance on the software side in Windows? So the Intel 320, is this this is the new updated SATA 3 gig per second drive that just came out?
Correct. That's the 25 nanometer flash, 10 channel, the same, an actual Intel controller solution.
Right.
It's not like the 510, I believe, that they switched over and they used the other chip, which, in my opinion, was a mistake. So this is them going back to their own chip. Yes, it's only serial ATA 3 gigabit. It actually outmaneuvers Intel's own 6 gigabit solution in almost every respect, except for just straight line speed, which is not as important as the rest of the stuff, in my opinion. So for optimizing it, best thing you could do in Windows, use Windows 7, so you're using trim. Drive's going to be much happier. B, if you can help it, don't use it in a RAID. And if you just bought it, you probably just bought one, it'll perform just fine all by itself. You don't really need 2 of them. And C, there's a software tool. I think you could just do like intel.com/go/SSD or just /SSD, I believe. And just download their tool. They have a software solution that runs under Windows. It's like an SSD optimizer kind of tool. I think it's just called SSD Toolbox from Intel. And it has the newest version of the Toolbox actually does a lot of that for you. Like if you disable prefetch, those sorts of things that you usually see in forum posts from power users doing like registry tweaks and whatnot. The Intel tool has incorporated many of those into itself. So the first time you run it, it'll say, hey, I see you're using an Intel 320 SSD. Would you like to do the following things? And it just gives you the laundry list, and all you basically do is hit OK. And then you might have to reboot, but
sure,
no big deal.
That seems pretty simple.
And yeah, they made it extremely painless, extremely simple. That's easiest way to go, especially with an Intel one. Realize that tool doesn't support any other brand, right? So it's just Intel specific.
Okay, you want to take out this next question?
Sure. Let's see. From IT Crashed. That's cute. At Ryan Shrout, have the GTX 590 VRM issues been fixed? Is upgraded from a 5870 to a 590 worth it for triple monitor gaming?
Okay, so this guy's going from a 5870. He wants to go from 5870 to 590. The VRM issues, I assume he's talking about kind of the internet explosion that happened when as far as I know, maybe a couple of the GTX 590s had an issue with a specific beta driver that I don't know how. I really don't understand how it happened, but it apparently blew up, sparks flew, et cetera, et cetera. That's always bad, of course. I haven't seen that. I haven't had any first-person experience with it. All of the editors and reviewers that I've talked with, nobody has had any issues with that. So I'd imagine if this hasn't continued to have been a problem and that the pressure hasn't built up, so that there's big revolts and stuff online, as seems to happen whenever there's any kind of small issue, that they have been fixed. I wouldn't worry about that. As for upgrading from a 5870 to 590, is it worth it for triple monitor gaming? I would say you are coming to one of the few instances where going to this expensive of a graphics card, this high end of a graphics card, is actually going to be worth it. If I'm assuming on a 5870 you already have a 3-monitor configuration, then you are definitely going to see performance improvements going from that to a 590, which supports 3 monitors out of a single card. You're moving from iFinity to NVIDIA Surround, but the idea is exactly the same. Set up the driver, the games will automatically recognize it and that type of thing. So is it worth it? Really comes down to how much money you're willing to spend. If you're considering buying a GTX 590 anyway, chances are you are the type of gamer that will enjoy the performance increases and the image quality and possible resolution increases you'll be able to get out of that card. So I would recommend that you go for it. Let's see, we got emails here now from Darren about storage area network. He says, first, loving the show. Keep up the good work. Have to say the show is informative and addictive to geeks like me. Okay, as a freelance video editor for broadcast and a supervisor, I've always worked in bigger facilities where the network and storage side of things is taken care of. But I've just landed a contract where I will be setting up and managing a small SAN. The requirements are that there will be at most 4 video editors attached to the SAN via gigabit Ethernet. They will all be accessing a pool of relatively low bandwidth video files. Based on my initial research, this is a pretty basic entry-level SAN setup. I have noticed that there are a lot of out-of-the-box SAN setups from the likes of Netgear, D-Link, etc., with SAN becoming a much more viable option for small business and maybe eventually the everyday user. I thought it might be helpful if you could point me in the direction of some SAN hardware or pre-built SAN solutions that you guys know of. And P.S., what do you guys think of a Drobo FS as a potential solution for me? Is it fast enough for 4 video editors accessing data at once? We happen to have a good SAN guy on the line with us right now. So I'm curious, 4 video editors, how much bandwidth do you think something like that would need? And is a single gigabit Ethernet connection going to feed it well?
It really all depends on what kind of... if he's already talking about connecting them via gigabit Ethernet, he's probably okay with 100 megabytes per second-ish for speed. The problem is, if he has 4 of them hitting at once, if you just think about that, then that's assuming that to not choke out your link, just your Ethernet itself,
right,
you're only doing 25 meg per second, which
per person,
if you're doing, per person, right? So if you're doing, it all depends on what kind of video, right? If it's any kind of HD, you're really pushing it there.
He says low bandwidth video files, so I'm not
okay.
Not a whole lot of detail there, but.
So he probably has a lot of, he wants a SAN because there's a lot of video to store, but maybe it's not such high quality where that's an issue. Okay, fair enough. So if it's that kind of a deal where it's not really crazy bandwidth, then I would actually recommend Drobo FS just for simplicity because it's just out-of-the-box solution. It can't get much more out of the box than that, especially with Drobo FS, because that acts like a NAS right out of the box, and we already know how bulletproof the device is itself. The only concern really is just how bulletproof the drives are, right? So realize if you do Drobo FS, I would recommend A, use dual redundancy mode, and B, still have some kind of a backup, really. I mean, I know as much as we rant and rave about that thing, like I haven't been able to break it, and I've broken almost everything else that I've tested at some point, right? Yeah, still have some kind of a backup regime. But I would use double redundancy, and also a little tidbit there, the Drobo FS, and just as of a few days ago, the Drobo Pro as well, have firmware updates to support 3 terabyte drives. So you'll have plenty of room, right? And 3 terabyte drives are not much more than 2 terabyte as far as, your cost per gig is almost the same now.
Right, but your density increases quite a bit.
Your density increases, yeah, and then then that hit is not as bad when you switch over to dual redundancy. Yes, you still lost 2 drives worth of space, but you had 6 times 3 terabytes, worth of capacity there.
Cool.
Yeah. So other solutions, the only other way I would do it is I would roll my own. I would build it from scratch. I'd buy an Eureka RAID card. I'd buy like a Shenbro chassis. And just for whatever, they make them in any kind of capacity you want. I would just get the Eureka card that fit that many drives, and it's literally plug and play with those chassis. I built 2 of them 6 months ago. And
now, but what about the SAN software, the SAN side of things on that regard?
If you go that way, then you should do you could actually do it with Windows 7 if it's a small work group like that with only 4 users. You could just do Windows 7 and just set it up as like a work group kind of share. The sharing is actually pretty quick on Windows 7, especially if all the machines are the same, same Windows. You're going to be pretty quick.
All right, worth a shot. You want to jump down here and take this email from Cooper, who's talking about thermal paste. Scroll down.
Sure, thermal paste. Remember, hey, I can actually pipe in on this one too. Let me start this email with a modified cliche. Love the show, long-time listener, first-time emailer. Okay, anyway, a few episodes back, there was a question about thermal paste and cleaning it from a CPU. Patrick mentioned using isopropyl alcohol. I've personally found something much easier, fast, and does an amazing job. Orange Glow brand wood polish and conditioner, or Goo Gone. Not the Goo Off brand, he mentions. 1 drop will soften and make it extremely easy to remove the oldest, hardest, and crustiest thermal paste, as well as clean up new paste where you got too much, etc., etc. Try it and you will never bother with alcohol again. And I can actually speak to this, not because of those products, but the fact that those 2 products he mentions are orange-based, and the Arctic Silver cleaning thing that you can get is like part 1 and part 2 cleaning bottles, which I showed off on the PC Perspective podcast like a month back when we talked about this. When you use that stuff, the main cleaner, the step 1, that is obviously an orange-based cleaner. I mean, it has like the strongest
smells citrusy.
Yeah, it is complete citrus in a bottle. Yeah. And it's the same kind of deal. You put a drop on there, and it literally, you can just watch it just like re-emulsifies and re-softens all the thermal paste, and it just makes it.
I agree. The orange-based stuff's been pretty good. Recently, we've been using this. This is Goo Gone Extreme with an X. XTREME, because that means it's awesome. This is a acetone-based product, and it's kind of like an aerosol spray type thing. And also another good point is it smells like model glue, and that's always a plus.
Okay, I'm going to throw out a warning for those. First of all, don't spray that thing like straight at your motherboard.
No.
If you can help it.
No.
Take the CPU off, right?
Yes.
And then B, don't overdo it outside the CPU, because that will actually soften the glue that holds the heat spreader.
No, what I tend to do is spray it on a towel. You spray it on the towel first.
Yes, see, there you go. It's like using a spray bottle of Windex on like your monitor. Do not spray directly on the monitor.
Exactly.
Spray on
your TV.
Do that. Because
you don't have any problem with that with the orange stuff?
That stuff will instantly melt even the conformal coating on PCBs. Right, so that's coating that keeps all the conductors from corroding over time, and the solder pads from rusting. Yeah, keep that stuff away from that.
Yeah, just be careful. We've got an email from Dave about lighted screens. Way back in the day, I had an HP Jornada Pocket PC PDA. Wow, it's going back. It had a backlit LCD screen that was also reflective. The more light you put on the screen, the brighter it got. In direct sunlight, it was really bright. almost hard to look at. How come Apple didn't do anything like that with the iPad screen? Is there some lost technology that people have forgotten about, or is there some big downside to this technology? Or am I just being sentimental and remembering it as better than it was? Boy, Sonny, those were good old days.
I know the answer.
Do you? Real quick, I'll say I have a golf GPS device that uses one of these types of screens that when direct sunlight is hitting it, that's when you can see it the best. But I think that's when you're in low light situations, it's much harder to see. So
those are actually, it has to be a very weak kind of a TN based LCD to be able to do that, where the sunlight can come in and reflect and come back off the back like that.
Right.
So, and you have all the downsides that you would have to just a regular twisted pneumatic. So a TN panel is actually nothing more than a bunch of what you would find in your LCD based watch. That kind of a simple technology.
Okay.
Right? The only
Makes
difference
sense.
is that it's just much smaller, and they just put different color pixels behind each one of those segments. But the principle is exactly the same, right? And just like how when you twist your old school LCD watch a few degrees the wrong way, the whole panel just like blanks out on you. Those panels do the same kind of thing, right?
Right.
And the other weakness to it is the color is nowhere near as rich as you will get.
Yes, that is exactly correct, and it's very noticeable on that GPS device that I have. That it does have duller colors.
Yeah, so your off axis is horrible, and your and it would be so bad, literally, like if they put something like that into an iPad or an iPhone, if you put the display sideways, your one eye would have like a different set of colors than the other eye would. It would be that bad just from that slight bit of an angle difference. So yeah, just too many downsides to pull it off. It's great that you don't need a backlight in those situations. That would be awesome, but
yeah,
it's almost a moot point nowadays because you have LED backlighting, and that's
pretty
very,
low power.
very efficient. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, you want to take our last email from Jeff?
All right, email from Jeff about 3 terabyte RAID cards. Trying to convert an old Athlon 64 into a NAS box, but it only has 2 serial ATA ports. If I were to install a RAID card, would that device be able to support 3 terabyte hard drives? And if so, could you recommend a card? Okay. I can't give you a definitive answer that would cover just the huge swath of all RAID card brands on the market. I will say that I know that Arica supports 3 terabytes because I've been able to plug one in and actually use it. But it's sketchy elsewhere, right? So it's definite buyer beware. You're buying a RAID card. It's going to be several $100s. It's an expensive piece of hardware, right? Especially if you get a decent one. Make sure it has both driver and hardware support for that. It has to say it somewhere, right? And be careful how you're reading those specs, because a RAID card itself can appear to the system in a higher bit LBA mode, like 48-bit LBA, where it's actually able to present a volume greater than 2 terabytes to the operating system. That is a completely different animal than the card being able to read a drive that's supporting greater than 2 terabytes worth of LBAs.
I see.
Itself,
now,
right?
Didn't the first Western Digital drives come out with an HBA card?
They came out with a generic HBA. It was just an add-on card, and that it wasn't a RAID. It wasn't any kind of RAID card. It was just a generic host bus. Yeah, HBA is just host bus adapter, so it's not even meant to be powerful enough to be a RAID.
Gotcha.
But yes, I would probably say that your vast majority of any kind of RAID card that has like an XOR engine on it, the kind that actually has a CPU built onto it, like an IOP something chip, IOP 3 something, it'll be like a 3-digit number. Any of those most likely are going to support greater than 2 terabyte on the hard drive side. You just actually, do that 5 minutes of research. Download the manual for that guy. See if it actually says it in the specs, that sort of thing. It should say something. Look at the last firmware update. That's actually, I never buy any kind of RAID card, and this is a good practice for almost anything that's firmware updatable. Always download that last firmware update, see what the date of it is, see if it's recent, and look at the change notes, right? Because the change notes, chances are that last change is doing that thing that you just wanted to find out if it does anyway. Because, they would change it because their market's looking for it, right?
Yep, agreed. So that's gonna wrap up this week in computer hardware for this week. Thank everybody for joining on the live stream. If you want to watch us record this show live, we do so every Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Again, if you want to get in touch with us, we encourage you. Please send your emails. Please send us your questions. twich@twit.tv is the email address for that. Allyn, I'd like to thank you once again for joining us and filling in for Patrick.
My pleasure.
So with that, I'm Ryan Shrout, and we'll see you next week on Twitch.